Good morning, America. Hubert Johnson here with Taxes Made Easy. Just following up with you regarding this lovely day, what's going on with the world. And today's topic is an interesting one because, again, I get lots and lots of questions. I just dealt with the case yesterday talking about family law and how that affects individuals. So, again, we're going to talk about the differences there and how it can affect people one way or the other. But I think it's going to be a very interesting episode, very informative. I've done multiple national podcasts on this issue. So again, take down some notes. If you have questions through this, give us a call. Again, guardiantaxlaw.com or 520-485-7371. And we're going to have a lot of great information here for you on the smartmoneyculture.tv. And we'll be right back right after this commercial break. Welcome back, everybody. Hubert Johnson again here with Taxes Made Easy. So a couple big things in the news. First of all, the shutdown was averted for a short period of time. So again, as Congresses want to do, they just kick the can down the road. The 20% of the government was supposed to shut down today, or last night at midnight, and that they passed bills in the House and the Senate to kick the can down the road for a whole week. So we're going to be right back in this same boat next Friday for the 20%. However, for the rest of the government, that includes the IRS, that was supposed to shut down on March 8th, or was going to shut down if they didn't pass a funding bill. And that was extended out to the 22nd of March. So 2 weeks, 2 further weeks. So next week, March 8th, partial shutdown, and then on the 22nd is when it's set for a full shutdown if that happens. So again, hopefully Congress can come together, make some kind of deal that works for the American people and for the country, and can pass something that makes sense and actually get a budget in place. One of the biggest problems with our credit ratings and the fact that we've taken hits to our credit rating as a country has been the fact that we haven't been able to pass regular budgets, that we haven't handled the national debt, and that this has been an ongoing crisis mode or a continuing resolution where we've gone years at times without even passing a budget. So budgeting is so important as a country, but especially as a business owner. There's not a large corporation out there that doesn't live on budgets, on forecasting, on planning. I mean, you show me a corporation that doesn't do that, and I'll show you a corporation that's closing their doors and not succeeding. And there's many companies that are closing despite all of that planning, but they know and they can make decisions before they have to before things are so urgent that they're in a dire straits. So one of the other articles I came across, and I think this is a very important article, I'm probably going to talk about this a lot next week, is cost of living for homeowners, aspiring homeowners. So you have inadequate incomes, and this is from the Epic Times talking about cost of living being a serious barrier to buying a home. And what do you think is the number one barrier to people purchasing a home? Debt. So there's a couple of reasons. They say that the prices of the homes are too high, interest rates are too high, which makes their monthly payment go up. Interest rates control monthly payment as much or more than the actual cost of the home because you're spreading that over so long. But it's very common to have monthly payments in the 2000s or in the 3000s, 4000s, $4,000 a month, depending on where your home is and what's the total cost. And now that the interest rates are still in the high 7s, low 8s, I was talking to someone yesterday, there's a realtor about this, and again, it's been brutal for realtors and also for mortgage brokers. So you have credit cards that are killing people. Credit cards at a national high for the country at $1.2 trillion of credit card debt. And then you also have tax debt. And the thing about tax debt and purchasing a home is that when the IRS files liens against you, well, first of all, you have to have your last 3 tax years already filed to qualify for any kind of mortgage. And then you have to, if you have any tax liens against you or if there's outstanding tax debt, you have to have that set up in some kind of resolution. You have to deal with it to purchase a home. And that's something we do on a regular basis, is that we help people deal with these issues, address their taxes for the IRS and the state, and help them get into a home. Home ownership is very important, and we're going to talk about that more in detail next week. But I just want to touch on that, and just want to go over some facts real quick in this article. So 51% want to buy real property, but cost of living is too high. 54% believe that they don't have enough income. And that's mainly because a lot of their income is being chewed up by other kinds of debt. And then you have lack of financial assistance, 15%, student loan debt, 10%, which is, can really be a burden on people. If you don't have enough income, there are options, the IBA are options that a lot of people think about. So this is an interesting little paragraph here where it talks about 1/5 or 20% of homeowners or prospective homeowners say they'll never be able to save enough for a down payment or to purchase a home. They just say, forget it. There's no way we're going to be able to do it. There are all kinds of programs for down payment assistance. I had an employee a couple of years ago that we worked with her. She got some plan. It was a government plan. They helped pay for the mortgage on a small home for her. It's just her. But she was able to get into a home and purchase a home, showing that she had that regular income. And there's a lot of down payment assistance out there. 1/3 said that that 30% said it will take 5 years or more. So that's 50% of prospective homeowners to get a down payment, and 10% think it would take them a decade or more. So there are options out there. There are ways to purchase a home without saving up 20% for a down payment. So if you have questions, talk to a mortgage broker. If you have tax issues, give us a call. That's one of the things that we love doing here, is we love getting people in a better situation long term. And then that lovely thing about getting into a mortgage versus paying rent is, one, your mortgage is fixed. They're not going to continue to raise it. But 2, you get to write off the vast majority of it in interest. So the first decade or so, most of what you're paying goes straight to interest. It's always recommended to pay a little bit over your mortgage so that you're knocking away at the principal too. But it's a huge tax write-off to be paying the interest on a mortgage. So again, it really helps people be able to get out of the standard deduction, which thank goodness is higher than ever. But if you can actually start taking those deductions, writing it off, and getting tax credit for the interest being paid on your home, it can make a huge difference and help you pay less in taxes overall and become a homeowner. Which there's a lot of long-term benefits to being a homeowner. And it's a tough market out there. It is a tough market out there. We've got to see some kind of adjustment soon. I would imagine that either interest rates are going to come down. The problem with that is inflation just increased again. So it's a very tricky market here. So we'll talk about that more next week. There's a lot to cover there. And I'm going to see if I can't get an expert on to talk about this and really dive deep into how do we help people own and purchase homes. So switching gears to the main topic for today, family law. What a fun topic. And I say this, and I joke around. I like to have fun, and I'm a very sarcastic person, if you haven't picked that up. So family law is very important, though. it affects so many people. Divorce, unfortunately, is a very common thing today. And there's very little information about how does divorce intersect with taxes. And here's a funny thing. So most family law judges and many family law attorneys are horrible at math. They go into family law because it's not math, but there is math involved. And there's taxes and there's financial information. So a lot of times if they have a very math heavy case where there's a lot of property and issues, they'll hire an expert. And there's attorneys that specialize in property division and business valuations, et cetera, like that when it gets complicated. So having someone in your corner that can talk about these issues is been very, very helpful. So I just want to take a step back and just kind of give a broad overview of the issues that are addressed and deal with taxes when it comes to family law. And first of all, the IRS doesn't really, they do care about parts of what's in your settlement. So when your divorce is finalized and you get an MSA or your settlement agreement or divorce decree, there are some things that the IRS will pay attention to. And there's some things the IRS really doesn't care about at all. So the biggest thing that they don't pay attention to is when someone claims responsibility for paying the taxes. So again, yesterday I was talking to a gentleman and he's divorced, but he had an amicable relationship with his ex-wife and worked very closely with her on many occasions. And he said, look, the taxes are mostly mine. I told her I would pay for them in the divorce. I said, okay, that's fine. But the IRS doesn't care what's in the divorce decree when it comes to the taxes. We have to resolve the case for both of you. If we just resolve it for you, she's left hanging to the wind. Do you care about that? Some people don't care. They're like, look, she burned me. She's taken me for everything she can. I don't care. But in this case, he cared. And he wanted to do right by her. And it's like, okay, we'll take care of her too. And most of the time, we don't even charge anything extra if it's a fairly straightforward case, and we're not in this case. But you've got to be aware of the complications here and how it can affect relationship, because as much as family law is contentious, the best results, especially if you have kids, is where the parents can co-parent and work together. So we'll do whatever the client wishes, but it is very important to understand if you've gone through a divorce, or even better, if you haven't gone through a divorce and you're facing that, get some good information so you can draft your agreement that helps you the most, so that you don't agree to this. And I don't know how many times people have accepted an agreement where the one party said, oh, I'll take on the taxes, and it actually helps the other person in the divorce, and then they don't take care of it. That's very, very common. So we've got a commercial break coming up, and we'll be right back after that. Welcome back, everybody. Here at Texas Made Easy, we're focusing today on family law and taxes. So a couple of the main issues. You have property division and child support alimony. So ongoing payments, and then how do you divide out the property in between the two parties in a divorce. Those are the two biggest issues. And we're going to talk about who should claim the kids, first of all. And I'm talking about claiming the kids on a tax return. So pretty much every division or calculator, child support calculator, will take into account who's claiming the kids. The reason for that is whoever claims the kids can get the earned income tax credit, can get some other benefits that reduces their taxes. They get more credits, and so they can get a larger refund. So there's a tax benefit to it. Now, usually whoever has majority custody will claim the kids on their tax return. Whoever is providing the majority of their support, if they're living 50-50, it's kind of a distinction. I see a lot of people do that where they switch the kids back and forth. And if that works for you, fine. Problem is when you're switching the kids back and forth and you owe taxes, it gets a bit messy. So the IRS prefers stability. They prefer to know what's going on. And as we talked about, having more and more, having dependents, especially if they don't qualify for the earned income credit, it doesn't really matter for tax purposes because the 2017 the Trump tax cuts changed that, where you didn't get credit for all the dependents, but the individual and primary and secondary people on the tax return, their deductions, the standard deduction was doubled. So kind of helps some, hurts others. But the end result is that on your tax return, it might not make that much of an impact anymore who claims the kids, or if you have quite a few kids. But it absolutely can for collections. We've talked in depth about how filing your tax returns is one part of the IRS, collections is a different part of the IRS, and their analysis of what matters isn't the same. So it can definitely, if you have a tax issue and you're trying to resolve this, it can definitely impact your case as to who's claiming the kids. So if one person's claiming them, what I normally say is, look, if there's a fight over it, if you let the other person claim the kids, you'll end up paying less in child support if you're paying child support, or you'll get more in child support and then move forward. The problem is if you get someone that isn't supporting the kids and they're claiming the kids when they shouldn't, and they're not paying any support, there's no compensation there. So if that's the case, you can file, even if they've already claimed the kids, you can file and claim the kids, but you have to provide proof and substantiation that they're living with you. Their school records are with you. The doctors they go to are with you. Again, school records are a huge thing, but anything with their name on it showing that, look, they reside at your home primarily, and any court order showing that you're the one that's supposed to claim them can go a long way to reversing that and preventing them from claiming the kids in the future, because when they do that, and then you flip it on them, then the ex-spouse will end up owing more in taxes. So hopefully they learn their lesson. There are some people that don't. They don't learn, and they just continue to cause trouble wherever they can because that's the kind of person they are. So child support and alimony used to be taxable to the receiver. It's not anymore. So anything after 2019 is taxable to the person paying the child support and alimony. So that's an additional tax burden on them and the person receiving it. But when you're looking at your financial information, you get full credit for child support. You get full credit for alimony as long as it's court ordered. So the same case the other day, gentleman I was talking to, he owed $500 a month in child support, but he was making more money. So being a gentleman, he was paying more. But the IRS will give him credit for what's ordered in the court. If they wanted to go and modify it, increase it, he would get credit for the increase. But it's not going to make a big difference in this case, so it's not going to hurt him. But I've had one case, true story, the gentleman was paying alimony to his ex-wife, and there was no court order. He was just paying what he thought he should be paying in alimony. His ex-wife was across the country. She didn't believe in government, didn't believe in courts, and did not want to finalize anything, even his divorce. So even though they were separated, they technically were not divorced. And so he was getting zero credit for all this money he was paying. I said, look, you have two choices. Tell her to go to court, or you stop the payments, because it's not a legally enforceable order. And so the problem with the IRS is, even though you have a moral obligation to do something, unless there's a legal obligation, the IRS doesn't really care. Because the temptation there is too ripe, and they've seen too many people play this game or try to play this game where, my ex-wife, I can just give all my money to her, pretend I'm poor to the IRS, and then switch things up once I'm done dealing with the IRS. Not so fast. If there's a court order in place, the IRS will respect it. And that's one thing in a court decree that they will follow. Another thing that they will follow is property division. So with child support alimony, whatever the balancing act is, if you end up paying more, you should be asking for more in assets, but you should also be planning tax-wise. Who has the higher tax burden? Who is this going to help? And I want to talk about, before we get into property issues, how do IRS tax accounts work in divorce? So in most cases, when you have a married couple, they're filing jointly. When they get divorced, they have one account that's married filing jointly. Both Social Security numbers are on this account. But when they get split or mirrored, because now they're divorced and now they start filing either first married filing separate or single once they're divorced, it splits their accounts apart. So the joint tax debt that they owe together is just one amount, but then it gets split and it follows their accounts. So if you have husband over here and wife over here, and together they owed $100,000, but now they're split, the IRS is going to go after both of them for the same amount. So I had a case yesterday. A guy has a small amount, around $3,000 owed for 2016. It's a older debt. And he's trying to get some newer tax returns filed so that way we can wrap it all up and do one resolution for everything for him. And he was worried that older debt might be in collection. So we called up on it, and yes, he's divorced, but it's in an installment agreement status. And someone's paying on it. He's not paying on it. But what should be happening, and this is the way it should happen, is that when it splits, if one person set up an agreement, it doesn't cover the other person. So if one person does a hardship status and the IRS can't come after them because they're protected, the other person is wide open. If one person does an offer and compromise and wipes out their balance, the IRS can still go after the other person, and they will. Especially with an offer and compromise. That's still a valid debt under the other Social Security number. But what happens if husband pays it off by $30,000? It pays the whole debt down for both parties because it's one debt, but it's called joint and several liability, so the IRS can go after both parties. So you see this a lot in civil cases where it's determined that there's joint and several liability, where the person suing them will go after the deep pockets. They'll go after whoever can be found responsible, and then they'll try to get most of the money from the person with deep pockets and then force them to go after the other parties that also had a shared responsibility. And so the IRS, they'll follow the money. They'll get the money where they can, and they'll leave it between the parties to try to sort it out in court. One person ends up paying what the other person said they should have been paying. Good luck going to court and getting blood from a stone. Even if you get a judgment, it's hard to enforce. It's really hard to enforce. So when people say they're going to pay taxes and then they don't, it's very, very hard to enforce after the fact. So you can go in, you can get a judgment from a family law court, and it's very common for them to blow it off. So that's why if you have assets, it doesn't matter who's liable. If you think the other party is going to be irresponsible, they caused the tax debt anyway. And sometimes that just happens. Sometimes it's just life. A lot of times it's just life that happens. But if they're the party that couldn't get things together, they didn't have a good plan, and your name is on that tax debt too, don't treat it as 50-50 because the IRS won't. I would say, look, I'll handle it. Give me some more assets from the marriage to compensate me for handling this tax debt. I'm the more responsible party. I'm the one that's going to handle this. And if the judge doesn't understand why, we've explained that to plenty of judges. We'll write up a short memo. You can send it in, submit it, and make sure that you're protected, that you're not going to get hurt coming out of this divorce proceeding. So the IRS is still going to go after both parties, but again, we see this all the time, and guys, it's usually you that have a business or something like that, and you're not paying the tax debt, and it falls on the wife. And so, yeah, and I've seen it the other way around. It goes both ways, but it's typically the guys that owe taxes going into a divorce, and the other party gets stuck holding the bag. So I would definitely make sure you're protected and recommend that you take on that responsibility for those taxes. And don't forget the current year taxes that you might owe for as well. So I want to talk a little bit about filing and making sure you don't owe in the first place. So if you can do that, that's ideal. Can you still stay married to someone that owes taxes? Absolutely. I would recommend, though, you do married filing separate. It's not as advantageous tax-wise to file married filing separate, but if it can save you the headache of dealing with your partner's tax issues, it can save marriages, can give you peace of mind. You have your money, you do your thing. They have their money, they do their thing. And then it's up to them if they actually take care of it or not, but you won't be held responsible. You do have to worry about any joint assets, though. So the IRS can go after any joint assets, like joint bank accounts. If you own a home in both names, the tax lien can be filed and it can affect both parties. So try to make sure your assets are separate as well. If you're in a community property state, that's easier said than done, unless you own the property prior to the marriage. So if you don't own a home, if you don't have a joint bank account, if you have a joint bank account with very little in it, you don't have to worry too much about it. You can protect yourself from a spouse that does owe taxes. And if you're the spouse that owes taxes, deal with it. There are options. There are ways to deal with it and handle it. It's tougher when you're in a non-liable situation where one person owes, the other person doesn't. It makes it, we've talked about that. There's a whole episode on that. But take the bull by the horns, deal with it. It can save your marriage. This gets very real when you're talking to real people. I had a gentleman I was talking to yesterday, talking about how this tax debt really caused a real rough patch in the marriage. And there are other issues too, I'm sure. And he shared with me that at one point he was considering suicide. It's never that bad. It's never worth it. It's kind of home right now because my sons this morning are going to a funeral for one of their good friends that committed suicide about a week and a half ago. It's for a separate issue, had nothing to do with taxes. But there's plenty of people that commit suicide over taxes. Please get help. If you're that frustrated with the IRS, get an expert opinion. And it sounds cheesy and corny, but it's so true. Almost every single case, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. If you're willing to take action, there's a way to resolve this and give you peace of mind and get the IRS off your back and get it where you can actually live your life. It might take time, but there are options in this country. There's a lot of ways to deal with tax debt, to deal with other kinds of debts as well, because as a general principle, we believe that people shouldn't be held down by debt. We don't believe in servitude. We believe in the little guy. And again, if you're in that position where it's hurting your marriage, it's causing massive depression, give us a call. Give somebody a call. There are ways forward. There are free clinics. There's plenty of information online. And there are plenty of tax firms out there that will give you free advice without charging you just to talk to someone. Doesn't mean if there is a consultation fee, it might be well worth it. I don't mean to say that, but if you don't have any money, there are free legal tax clinics out there. Get the help you need. So that's my public service announcement for the day. Kind of hits home with what my kids are dealing with. They went to the viewing last night, and today's the funeral. So I'm proud to say that we have helped save marriages my team and I, we've helped turn people around that were extremely depressed, given them a way out of this. And again, I can't tell you. My office manager teases me that I make people cry. People come in, they sit down, they talk with me, or over the phone, they'll talk with me. We'll lay out all of their options. We'll give them all the information they need, and then talk about the ways out. Here's how you resolve it. Here are your different options. You get to choose. And that release, that emotional release of that burden where they thought there was no way out, no solution, gets lifted. And that's very powerful. If you're going through a difficult time in your marriage, or you're going through a very difficult divorce, those are some of the darkest times for people. I've been divorced myself. I understand. I've dealt with mental illness in my family. It's tough. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. So get the help. Reach out. And there's plenty of mental health agencies out there. Now, going back to family law. So you have the two separate accounts. It needs to be dealt with separately. So you can protect yourself by filing separately, making sure you have separate assets. But get some advice as you go through this, because there's a lot of times where people think, I have to divorce this person. He has debt. I don't want it to splash on me and ruin my career, my finances, my future. There are ways to protect yourself. So if your spouse has the issues and you're not sure, give us a call. We do advise people going into divorce and in divorce. So again, we have, right now we're dealing with a fairly complicated case where two large businesses, hundreds of thousands of dollars going back, and we're writing a memo to the judge, and it's already been prepared and submitted. That's going straight from his family law attorney to the judge. That's allowing the judge to allow for a huge asset that will save my clients up to $500,000. So again, if you have these questions, the judge doesn't understand, the family law doesn't understand, the attorneys, it's typical that they don't understand. Their family law attorneys are not tax attorneys. So get that advice, get that help, and we can steer you in the right direction. So when we come back, we're going to focus on some of the property issues and how that can be affected through taxes, and try to wrap this up because it is Friday, and try to wrap it up on a brighter note. But again, these are very important for issues. So again, I do not hesitate to call us if you have questions. 520-485-7371. Welcome back, everybody, for the final session here for today. And we're going to dive into property issues and family law. So division of assets is always a fun part where you got to say, here, I want this, I want that. So I want to touch on, first of all, on the difference between community property states and states that don't have community property. So where does community property come from? And this kind of helps explain it. It actually comes from some of the old Spanish law. So it really goes back to, and most of the states that have it were all taken over from the Mexican-American War. And so when we go through the list of states, it's going to make sense when you talk about it. Now, not all of them. Some of them are just holdovers, so they've adopted it. But there's a history behind all of this. So a lot of it is where it comes from. There were previous territories by the French, or there's where that was the history of the laws back then. But the biggest states were all pretty much Mexican territories at one point. So Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, California, we all part of Mexico until the Mexican-American War. Then some of the other states that still have property, that do have community property laws, are Washington, Idaho, and Wisconsin, kind of off on its own. So what is community property? Community property is where the assets in the marriage are divided 50-50. Doesn't matter where they come from. It's pretty hard and clear that as assets are paid for with marital funds, then whatever equities accrued in those assets is attributable to both spouses 50-50 in the case of a divorce. But the IRS uses this for offers. They use this to tell people, hey, you need to try to get a loan out on a house. And, again, this is a big issue when it comes up in divorce. So a lot of people, if you don't understand community property law and how it works, read up on it. If you're in a community property state, you can purchase a house together, have one person pay for all of it with their income. But any income earned while you're in marriage is a community property asset. It's a communal asset. So if one person's paying $1,000 towards the house and the other is paying $9,000 a month to the house still gets divided 50-50 in the case of a divorce. So even if someone's not divorced and one person knows that the other person doesn't, and we see this, I have a case like that right now, where the wife was on Social Security, she had a business, she had things going on, and ended up owing, she got scammed. In this case, she got scammed, which happens all too often. And she owes about $400,000. But it's just her debt, because when the scam happened, the husband, they figured it out. They say, look, he has the money. It's like, I'm not filing jointly with you this year. You're going to file separate, and it's just going to be under your social, because if it's under my social, they're going to come after me and all of the income I have. So when we go into this and we're making this arrangement with the IRS, you've got to be aware of any property that's marital property. In this case, they're in a separate property state, so we don't have to worry about it, but they moved around, so we have to, it gets a little tricky and you have to dig into this. So understanding how community property works and separate property. So if you own something prior to the marriage, or if you get an inheritance or something that has nothing to do with the marriage, and you keep that separate, you can trace that and claim that it's your separate property and it's not joint property, and the IRS will have to leave it alone if you don't owe the taxes. And in the case of a divorce, you'll be awarded that separate property. Now, if you take that separate property and you mix it in, you put it in joint accounts, and it gets much harder to trace that money, and you follow it and say, hey, it's still separate property, still a separate investment, it's still separate. That's where it becomes mixed in, and it can lose that characterization of being separate property. So again, this is getting into property law, but it definitely affects people when you're talking about dealing and resolving IRS tax debt. So here's the question: how does the IRS look at these cases where there's community property? So first of all, whatever you can label as separate property, you want to do that. But if you live in any of those states or did live in those states for a time, you've got to be aware of community property issues. So if it's not joint property, if it's just titled in one person's name, the IRS is going to be very curious to see, okay, why was it put in just one person's name? What's the story behind it? And is there any community property in it? Now, up and down the East Coast, most of the rest of the United States is all separate property, which means the IRS can't claim that it's 50-50. The rule of thumb there is that there will be an equitable distribution. And what that means is that the court's going to figure it out. It's much less of a hard line rule. The rules vary by state, which means it's not as clear cut for the IRS to come in and say, hey, 50% of the property is yours and we're going to attribute to you. So if you have something that someone else purchased, they use their income for, the IRS, and they don't owe, it's much harder for the IRS to come in and say, hey, you're going to get a portion of that. They really can't say that, so they don't. So be aware of what state you're in and the division of assets. Again, another big thing with the division of assets is that if someone is awarded an asset in a divorce and the divorce is finalized, the IRS generally respects that division of assets. Now, if it's very lopsided where one person says, hey, take all the assets, I've got to deal with these IRS issues, and you walk out of it with nothing and the other person walks out with everything, yeah, they might question that. They can't go back and force it, but it becomes a tricky issue where they might treat it as a dissipated asset where you just give everything away. So don't do that. But if you're going in and you take maybe something like a retirement account that can be protected, you can be choosy about which assets you hold on to. And if you come out of it in a situation where you have your share of the assets, but their assets the IRS either can't go after, or things that can be protected, or they don't vest for a long time or something like that, then you can still qualify for a great resolution with the IRS. So this is why if you have tax issues and you're going through a divorce, assume your family law attorney knows almost nothing about taxes, and they probably know even less about dealing with IRS collections. So that's why it is, and again, it's getting a little weeds talking about separate property, community property, how the IRS is going to treat it. If you have this situation, call, get some free advice. It can save you thousands of dollars, and in some cases, like the case we're working with now, $500,000. So again, it doesn't hurt to get some free advice, and it can save you a lot of money. So we've only got about 6-7 minutes left. So I'm just going to finish up talking about property division here. You don't want cash. Real estate or rental properties, things that you can show, depending on what you qualify for, can absolutely be what you want out of a divorce. So you can kind of pick and choose and negotiate with your with going through divorce what assets you want, which ones you don't want, and it can definitely help when planning this, especially if both people owe. You can make some kind of arrangement. So making an arrangement, it all depends on the people. A lot of times there's bad blood, there's bad communication, so we'll just resolve it for one party. We've had plenty of times where they're married and they want to resolve the case together, or they're going through a divorce and they want to work together, but then when their interests divide, they go separate ways as far as their advice. We can help both people, but if a true conflict of interest arises, then we'll have to pass the case on to somebody else. That's rare, but I've seen it happen. Where again, that's when representing one person, the representations you make for one person can conflict and hurt the other person. That's where it becomes a conflict of interest to give advice to both sides, and that's when they need to find other representations. But we represent both parties on a regular basis, and usually there's no problem. And again, we've set up plenty of installment agreements or even a hardship statuses where the parties were separate in two different homes, and we've also done dual offer and compromises. It's two separate cases, but again, we gave it pretty deep discounts if we're handling both cases at the same time. So again, we have set those up where we have an installment agreement where both people are on it, and as long as the installment agreement is maintained, you're fine. So one gentleman, this is years ago, called and hired us. He said, look, she's a great gal. I messed up the marriage. It's my fault. I want to deal with it. I have these tax debt. It was my taxes, etc. And we set him up an installment agreement. They paid for years. And then his case changed where he couldn't afford the payments anymore. We came back and said, okay, we'll make sure she knows what you're doing if you want to keep that amicable relationship. And he did. And we put him in a hardship status because that's what he needed at the time. So again, get that advice. And again, if you're not working together, we can absolutely help one party and not the other. Or we can tell both of them, look, just let them know that if they want help, it's going to leave them open to whatever collections or issues that might rise up. But again, our biggest goal is not to is to help find peace, deal with the IRS and tax issues, and help you move on. And this, of course, it's very common that when you're dealing with children or other issues, things get very contentious. There's times I've sat down with both parties, even in a contentious situation, explained what we were doing, and just asked them, do you think you can work together? Do you think you can get this taken care of? You don't have to communicate. Between the two of you, we'll be that go-between and make sure we get this done. And if they can work together for a common goal, we'll do that. Just one caveat here, or not caveat, but one other piece of information I'll just emphasize. Get someone that's flexible. So if we start a case and we're going for an installment agreement and their situation changes, then all of a sudden they qualify for a hardship status or even an offer, we'll switch gears and we'll do what's best for the client in that moment. If we start with a installment agreement and then all of a sudden they become eligible for a non-collectible status, we'll do that, or vice versa. But if someone's information, we've had cases where people's income has doubled on us in the middle of the case. I'm like, I'm great, so glad that your business is thriving, but now we have to do something else. But we always try to never leave people hanging without a real solution. We're always trying to set up something as long as the clients continue to work with us. So we've covered a lot in this session on family law and taxes. I'm sure there's plenty of questions out there. And so to get the questions answered on your particular case, you hope the information that's been shared has been helpful. Feel free to share this information with someone else that you might know. But again, if you have questions, go to us at guardiantaxlaw.com or give us a call at 520-485-7371. And if you want to participate in the program or reach out to us, go to smartmoneyculture.tv where you can watch the show, or click on that button for opportunity in the top right corner, and you can talk directly to the show producers and see how you can either come on the show or get in contact directly with us. So again, our number is 520-485-7371. I don't know about you, but here in Tucson, it's a beautiful day. We're spoiled. My daughter's already talking about going in the pool, but it's only 60 degrees. She might still go in it, though, because she's a little crazy. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And again, don't have to worry about the IRS or the government shutting down for now. But one thing, and this is one article I saw, I didn't mention, they're issuing out 125,000 new letters. And they're targeting wealthier people, or so they say. But again, they have a lot of times they have no way of telling who's wealthy and who's not. So they're just going off the information that they have, which is limited. But again, a whole raft of new letters is going out. So if you have questions, call us. Get good information. If you're stressed out, get that peace of mind. And remember, there's always a way, almost always a way out or resolution to tax issues, to these 30 issues that can really cause a lot of headache and stress. And we love giving people that peace of mind and helping them find a way out. Again, Hubert Johnson here at Guardian Tax Law. Hope you have a great weekend.